The history of photography has often been the history of one class, race, or gender documenting another class, race, or gender, and often doing it insensitively or exploitive. How do we change that? The last thing I want to see is a generation of photographers either continue this tradition or feeling guilty about their chosen profession. I would also like to see the field diversified so that people of color, working class people, the LGBT community, women, and other communities that have often been left out become the image makers and not only the subjects of the photographs. Each of the photographers tonight have thought deeply about these issues and have approached image making directly to address and challenge this issue. Nina Berman is a documentary photographer, filmmaker, author, and educator. She's a founding member of Noor Images. Her wide-ranging work looks at American politics, militarism, post-violence trauma, and resistance. Her recent work, An Autobiography of Miss Wish, is a story told with a survivor of sexual violence and reported over 25 years. And Nina has a few copies of her book available tonight to purchase, and she'll sign copies. Lola Flash is a photographer using images to challenge stereotypes and offer new ways of seeing that transcend and interrogate gender, sexual, and racial norms. Flash works primarily in portraiture with a 4x5 film camera, engaging those who are often deemed invisible. Flash's work welcomes audiences who are willing to not only look, but also to see. Buddy Roy is a Brooklyn-based documentary photographer inspired by the raw and gritty lives of grassroots people, especially those from his homeland, Jamaica. Roy strives to tell the stories of their victories and ills by bringing their voices to both matte fiber paper and to his popular Instagram feed with nearly 250,000 followers, and that's very powerful. With painterly ability, Roy uses this diffused methodology to subtly awake the subconscious and expose the isolated figure or vision painted within a rhetorical frame. And each photographer tonight will present for 15 minutes, then we'll open up with a discussion afterwards. So please hold any questions until afterwards. And following the presentation and discussion, we'll have a reception in this room hosted by NYU. And we will be broadcasting this event live on Facebook. Now please join me in welcoming Nina Berman.
Thank you, Glenn and Barbara, and NYU. I'm very pleased to be here. We recently went through a Supreme Court nomination process where Brett Kavanaugh was accused of sexual assault. It was noted in the press how his accusers were so poised, accomplished. One had a doctorate, one had major government security clearances. And it got me thinking, what about women who aren't so powerful? What happens to them who want to stand up to their abusers? Women who maybe can't claim university degrees, who never got to be the women that they wanted to be in life, precisely because what was done to them was so traumatizing and debilitating. So how do we honor these women? I've tried to do this not as a journalistic outsider, but as a friend and artistic collaborator with a woman I met when she was a teenager in London in 1990. And I was a young photographer visiting the city. I went there with the vague idea of photographing the end of the Maggie Thatcher era. And at the time, there were hundreds of street kids living around the West End of London. We met randomly one night. She was hanging out at the door of a shelter trying to get in. She went by the name of Kathy Wish, and I spent a few weeks with her. as she would go in and out of shelters and hustle for money. And also smoke crack, which was actually kind of rare in London at the time. She was trying to keep far away from a circle of violent people who were controlling her life, who were using her, who were abusing her, men in London, and also a history of family members from her adopted white family in the south of England. She started to confide in me, and she showed me some of the violence that had been done to her. She was terrified, and when I left England, I gave her my phone number and my address, and I told her she could keep in touch. I came back to New York. I showed my pictures to magazine editors. They were disinterested, and so I put the pictures in my closet and really didn't think too much about the pictures for many, many years. Kathy did write to me. This is how we used to communicate in the old days. About her struggles, her attempts to get the police to arrest her perpetrators. She also sent me documents, including hospital reports and pages from a diary that she kept contemporaneously. In 1993, on the advice of Scotland Yard, she fled London for New York City. She was running for her life, fleeing her perpetrators and rapists, not so unlike the women and girls we see today trying to cross the US-Mexico border. I'm compressing this story very much, so just bear with me. Once in New York, she became a ward of New York State and became known as Kimberly Stevens. I stopped photographing her other than a few pictures that I keep in my family album. She wasn't a journalistic subject to me. For better or worse, she became an essential person in my life, and I would help her check into psychiatric institutions and navigate services. I became her de facto next of kin, and 28 years later, we know each other and speak several times a week. Once in New York, she tried to tell her story, a story that she was told not to tell. She told this story in drawings that she made and various documents and writings, and she would send them to me. And I became, in fact, her archivist. And I would hold on to these materials with the idea that one day she would want them back. In whatever apartment I was living in New York, there was always a box of Kim stuff. I'd just bring it with me. Anyone here lived in New York in the 1990s, early 90s? Okay, so you probably remember this was a common site, more common than it is today. I mean, you still see crack vials, but in New York City in the 1990s was just filled with crack cocaine. And it was very cheap, $2.50 a hit, or if you were a woman with no money, you could do a blowjob for a hit of crack. So I could see Kim's future as an addict, kind of addiction, HIV, likely jail. As a black woman in New York City, she was more criminalized than a white woman would be. She spent time on Rikers Island, the city's most notorious detention center. Anyone here know someone who's been at Rikers? Okay. She tried to kill herself at Rikers Island. I visited her at East Elmhurst Hospital, chained to a bed. She was brought to Rikers on a kind of bogus little drug charge, and she pled guilty with the promise that she would be given drug treatment. But then she tried to kill herself, and she was no longer an addict. She was a mental illness patient. In New York City, there's this peculiar idea that you're either an addict or you're mentally ill. And they don't really understand that the two go hand in hand, and that often drug addiction comes from trauma. And then, as Kim likes to say, then you become traumatized by living the life of a drug addict. So, to make a long story short, they couldn't find her a suitable place because she was no longer just an addict, she was someone who was a potential suicide. It's hard to see Rikers Island, right? You either fly over it or you go there. to see it. I rented a boat. She was in Rikers for about 6 months. She got out, and this was her first apartment, Midtown, West Midtown, Manhattan. Before going to Rikers, she was diagnosed with HIV. Years ago, that was a death sentence. Like, we know that. Today, people with HIV are surviving long, long years into their life. And it also has a weird added benefit in New York because of all the work that the activists did in the 1980s. So if you're HIV positive, you actually can get more resources and housing. And there are people in New York City today getting infected intentionally so that they can access services. So she was able to get this room, this little room, this shared bathroom, because she was HIV positive. And it was around this time, so we're now in 2008, where I decided I needed to photograph her again because I thought she was going to die. And here I am, a photographer, and I have no pictures of her. So I started photographing her and recording her audio and video so that I would have something to remember her by in case she did die. I want to be very clear here. I am an active participant in the telling of the story. I am not a neutral outsider. There are pictures that happen because I am participating in the story. And so I make no claim to journalistic objectivity here or anything like that. So she is in Roosevelt Hospital in this picture because I brought her there. And so this is a story in some ways about our friendship and our connection together. So I never intended to do anything with these pictures, but just to hold on to them for myself. I never showed them to editors. I never put them in stock archives or anything like that. And then over the years, Kim wrote her own story, and she had this idea about doing a book. And she had typed out, like 80, 90 pages of her own story. And so then in 2014, I got a residency for people working on sexual violence. And I, for the first time, took her material, all my material, put it together, and started to see if we could do something together. Diaries, documents, drawings, and all the rest. And I made an architectural framework and then presented it to her and brought in a designer who met her a bunch of times, and we started to build this story, this tangled story. This is Kathy at age 9. This was her yes-no book that she had drawn. This is how she describes her book. I didn't have a make-believe friend when I was small to tell me the best thing to do. I had this big book in mind that would flip through the pages on its own, and there would be the answer straight in front of me with a bright glow, yes or no, simple and safe. Should I run away or just stay? Whenever the answer I knew, deep down I was doing the right thing. This is her passport picture. I re-photographed it. I photographed moons because she used to say to me, Nina, if I die, you can talk to me through the moon. So I started taking pictures of moons. In the book, there's some of her notes to me. I put her drawings over my pictures. But you don't really see in the book, except for that one picture I showed you earlier of her smoking crack in London, or pictures of her smoking crack in New York. I didn't want to see that. It's not that I didn't have access, or she wouldn't have allowed me to see it. I had no desire to show that or to focus on that aspect of her life and her trauma. And so one of the things I like to say in talks is like what you don't show is also quite important. And just because you can show something doesn't mean that you need to show something. I am a journalist. I wanted to verify some aspects of her story and also just to go back to England and dig around. So we created a shot list for me, and I went back to England, and this is the phone booth in her little town in the south of England where she used to run away to and call for help. So as a photographer, I also realized that there are some media representations of addiction, poverty, and trauma that can be stigmatizing and reductive. And so what did I want to emphasize? What did I want people to know about Kim that she was a woman like so many others who works hard every day to keep it together, find a place of love and safety. She's a survivor, desperate for human connection, so I asked her to tell me moments where people in New York were actually nice to her. And there were several, and she explained to me some experiences on the subway. It was kind of crowded in the train, but there was a space. This lady said, "Come and sit next to me for a minute." And I thought, oh no, here we go. She's going to give me a lecture about rehab. But she didn't. She just wanted to talk to me. She said she had seen me for years. I told her my favorite color and that I liked animals, and that one day I wanted to work with kids. When I was born in England, and should leave it at that because the rest is a long story. There was this other lady, I think she lived right near the station. One day around rush hour, coming home from work time, she came up to me and she smiled. That smile took my hunger away and I felt like a human being. So I would go to that station around that time when I was real sad just for that smile. It gave me courage and the strength to carry on. This picture of loneliness, I think my loneliness, her loneliness. When I first met Kim, she was a teenager. I felt connected to her. My story wasn't her story, but I did plenty of drugs in high school. I kind of understood a little bit about this hustling life that she was feeling, and I felt connected to her. And then she came to New York City. Her addiction got worse. She became seen as like a poor black woman, all the stigmatization that institutions in New York impose on people, and my career started going up, and so I became more the successful person and she became someone who was more marginalized, and 110th Street became a kind of demarcation line for us. So this is me on one side of the subway track and her on the other. Over time, we didn't communicate just in letters, but often in text, and this is a text that she sent me, and this is a selfie. We also dreamed up pictures together, which was very exciting. This was Central Park, a place we both loved and love. So our work is a collaborative autobiography. She played the role of protagonist, but also co-narrator, photo editor, and text editor. There's nothing in the book she doesn't want and doesn't feel safe in revealing. And what was my role? I aimed for the design and combination of images and text to present not just a fiercely brave survivor with a harrowing story to tell, but of a woman who is also deeply reflective about loads of things, who makes beautiful drawings and plays exquisite piano, who is generous and creative, who has an enormous capacity for love and a desire for justice, not just for herself, but for others, and who in the end is someone you might all want to meet. There's something from her diary. In 2015, Kim was admitted into supportive housing, where counselors understand that addiction and trauma are connected. She started going to NA and different programs. In the making of her book, she succeeded in staying clean and serene for 30 days, and 60 days, and 90 days, and most recently 111 days. Over the summer, I've been shooting video all along, but over the summer, I put together a video. We made some new clips, and I'm going to show you 2.5 minutes of that. How's my timing? Do I have 2.5 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, 3 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, what's happening? Sorry.
The piano is amazing.
Hey Kim, remember the piano you said that when you get clean you're gonna go and play it? Remember the piano on
Over there?
Portraiture Street?
Yeah. I should go in there one day, right?
Yeah.
But I don't
You
know.
gotta tell me.
But I
You're
don't
like-
know
you're
whether to
like-
go in there looking bummy and then play it, or go in it, because I like to prove people wrong. I love that. Because when I do the same thing, and then when I learn and when people teach me the way I'm thinking is wrong, I feel like, wow, you're right.
You should decide, do you wanna go in there to prove something to someone else, or do you wanna go there just to go? And then you can decide what outfit you're gonna wear.
Yeah, exactly.
sorry for the technical glitches. I don't know why that's happening. Anyway, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Nina. It probably didn't help that I had 10 applications open while you were running that. It might have drawn on some of the processing power. And actually, Kim was going to be with us tonight. That was something we had spoken about, but it didn't work out in the end, but it would have been an interesting contribution to tonight's discussion. So the next speaker, Lola Flash. Let's see. Oh, no, these are ready. Bring up the right slideshow.
I would love that.
Let's see. Okay, should be all set.
Okay, thank you, Glenn, Barbara, and Lori. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming. So I'm curious, are y'all good? You're good? Okay. I'm okay. But I'm also tired. Is there anyone else who's tired? Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired of being misgendered. I'm tired of being misrepresented. And most of all, I'm angry, right? I'm angry that my story is not a part of his story. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm an artist and activist who is committed to using photography to challenge stereotypes and offer new ways of seeing. My work is directly related to my conflict with society and the absence of seeing my own reflection. Each of my portrait series speaks to a certain part of me, either my sexuality, my race, gender, and or age. I love the medium of photography and its ability to visually allure while initiating change. Here we have, I'm glad that Nina mentioned ACT UP or AIDS activists, because in this photograph was a campaign that Grand Fury made, and that's me on the end there. It was from 1989. So I'm sure some of you guys have seen this before. It was a national campaign. It went all over, and it was not received well in a lot of places. In Chicago, we were tarred. Our faces were tarred. Kissing Doesn't Kill refers to the fact that at that time people thought that you could contract the AIDS virus by kissing, and of course that wasn't true. And the tagline below is really the same old thing that's happening now and hasn't changed, and the reason why a lot of us are in the situations that we are in. Corporate greed, government inaction, and public indifference makes AIDS a political crisis. So you can kind of put that tagline to anything that's going on with at least my life. So I'm going to do a little mini lesson now, right, about seeing. Some of you might have seen this image. So does everyone see the two people, the two ladies? Everyone sees it? Yeah, do we nod?
Yes.
No. Okay, so if you're sitting next to someone who doesn't see it, can you tell them? Or should I just go over here? I'll do my teacher thing. Right. So everyone sees the lady, right, looking this way, the young lady, right? The older lady is the one that's hard to see. And sometimes I find you have to kind of move your head like this way a little bit. But let me just show you, because I only have 15 minutes. So here's the older lady's nose. That's her lips. So she's kind of looking down. You see it? Right, this is her nose.
Oh, you didn't see it either.
So
Yeah.
she's in profile. Yes. So she's looking. Yes, she's in profile exactly. So we're all looking at it, right? But we don't always see these things, right? Another example is the FedEx sign.
Yeah,
Raise your
the
hand.
arrow.
Who knows what the symbol is in the FedEx sign? Can you tell me over there?
The arrow.
The arrow, right? So the arrow is right between the E and the X. Maybe a lot of you guys knew that, but when I saw that, I was just like, wow, I never saw that before, right? So we look, but we don't always see. Sometimes we see what the media tells us to see, or maybe those myths that you grew up with, right? And I'm not saying that just to the white folks, right? Because we have bias too, right? So it's about being aware of the bias, because that's when change can happen. Now, my work. So my lifelong series is entitled Surpassing. And let me just back up. So when you look at my work, can you please see what I'm showing you? Right, I want you to look but see. That was the point of my little mini lesson. Here we go. My lifelong series is entitled Surpassing, and it examines the tragic impact skin pigmentation often plays on Black identity. Surpassing is shot on high vistas, traces the slave trade, and gathers a spectrum of beautiful skin color. The subjects assertively return the gaze without being confrontational, and by hanging the 4-foot by 5-foot photographs above eye level, the viewer has no choice but to look up to these people posed as characters from a modern Shakespearean melodrama. I beg the question, if Obama was a dark-skinned brother, would he have been elected president? I'll let you guys decide. That's what this whole series is about. So I can't really at this point talk to you about everyone, but of course you all know these people. Carrie Mae Williams, one of the most brilliant people I know, and Henry Louis Gates Jr. Skip, yes. So Salt. In my series Salt, I create portraits that feature iconic women who I strive to be like when I grow up. They're aged 70 years plus and still fiercely engaged in their life's work. In a culture where beauty is equated with youth, these women are not only beautiful, but accomplished and still making significant contributions to society. Some of you might know Agnes Gunn, who is a philanthropic person who has done so much for our community in New York in particular. Almost every museum you go to, you'll see from the collection of Agnes Gunn. We're so lucky to have her. And then next to her is Esther Cooper Jackson. Esther was a civil rights she's still alive, 101 years old. She's was a civil rights activist. She edited the magazine called Freedom Ways, and it featured people like Elizabeth Catholic and Charles White. She's just amazing. In fact, I called her the other day, and she's just so vibrant. She doesn't have any bit of Alzheimer's, and I think it's because she reads a lot. She's like, "Oh, Lola, how are you doing? What do you?" It's just kind of like talking to a friend, and she is. Most of my models become friends, or either they're my friends, and they, so it kind of works both ways. Especially for the older lady series, a lot of them who don't have children around or whatever, I tend to call them. In fact, on my way over here, I was so excited. I called one of them just to say what I was doing, and she was so happy for me. On the end is, I guess you're right, is Tony Parks, who is Gordon Parks' daughter. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago, but you can see that, she was really some kind of cantankerous woman. I'd say the sky was blue and she'd say it was aqua. I loved talking to her. She was amazing. And then the next to her is a woman who is the president of the board of directors at Pen and Brush, which is an amazing organization that for over 100 years they've sort of championed women artists and visual artists. And in fact, they gave me a show at the beginning of this year, a massive show, solo show. Love them. So the Defiant Ones kind of came out of the SALT series. Smithsonian just called me out of the blue and said, "We have this commission for you this spring." These are some of the women who helped desegregate the schools back in the 60s. And of course, I read about this, and this was a story that was in the history books, but it's nothing like really hearing those stories from the people. And they were all so modest. One of them actually said that, and the reason why they did this was because most of them were either like high school kids, or some of them were even like first graders. And they said, one of them said, if there's something on the floor, you pick it up. I mean, that's basically what they were saying. It was just like something you had to do. They felt that they had to do. And the stories about being spat at and food being thrown at them was really very hard to hear. But it also made me think that, wow, like if they hadn't done that, then it would have been my generation, because they're only 10 years older than me, so it would have been my generation. So then that would have impacted my education most likely. So maybe I wouldn't have gone to college, or maybe I wouldn't be standing here with 2 masters, So I give a lot to these women, and I almost didn't want to get paid, but I cashed the check. So Summize. Summize is an insider's count of the many ways genderqueer people are perceived and how visual representations of gender affect both our individual psyches and the broader society. This ongoing portrait series features images of people who appear gender fluid and who present themselves unapologetically. These two folks are from London. All of my work, I like to have a global approach because what's a problem or an issue here in America might not be a problem in Trinidad. Like race is one of those issues. This person here on your left, Utah. Utah and I were kind of internet friends for a while, and then when she came to New York, I was like, come stay at my place, I really want to photograph you. So when she came, the first thing I asked was, so what pronoun do I use? Because she had top surgery, I just imagined that she was trans. But she said she, her, and that the reason why she had top surgery was because she didn't want to navigate life with boobs. And I was kind of like, you can do that? Because my generation, we bound ourselves, or like me, wear the tightest bras imaginable. And so I think that just strikes up to me that the need for our intergenerational conversations, right? What your age group says is the thing might not be the thing for others. I think about my grandmother in the 60s when we were like, black is beautiful, grandma, we're black and we're beautiful. Everyone, started getting afros. And my grandmother was like, no, I'm not black, I'm colored. And I think that she didn't really explain it, but I think in hindsight, I think that, she grew up and people were calling her blackie and darkie and all these kinds of things. And so she didn't want to be called that, right? So I just want everyone, especially young folks, to remember that there's a reason. There's Billy, I call Billy my mom. Sense of Autumn. So Sense is a series that I decided to start probably when I was about in my 40s, because I used to say that I'll never take a photograph that's not political until the AIDS crisis isn't over. And even I can remember, like, whenever I'd wish for my birthday, blow up my candles for my birthday, I'd always wish for there to be an end to AIDS. And as you mentioned, people do live much longer, which is true. But when I was young, a lot of my friends died. And so I know that a lot of the work I do is for them because they couldn't do it, they can't do it. But everyone needs a little break, even an activist, so that series started. Legends is my latest series. It's actually digital. I have to tell you, digital feels like I'm cheating a little bit. These are the people who spearheaded a movement that wasn't a given. They are actors, advocates, DJs, performers, and much more. They are the trailblazers who presented an honest vision that clashed against societal norms as we knew it. They were not trendy, but instead trendsetters. Where there was once no canon, each legend in their own beautiful way has harnessed a pride that transcends hate. They made it possible for the LGBTQ+ community to not only survive, but to live a life of love. And I tell you, this series, next. You didn't see that. So this series really started because I was at Joe's Pub right across the way, right? And I saw this trans actress, and I was like excited to see her, and I was excited to see this performance I was going to see. So I went over to her, and I was just like, oh, have you seen this? And that's actually was Jason King. I don't know if you guys know him, but he teaches here as well. And so just really quickly, I went over to her. After I said that, she said, do I know you? And I was kind of like, oh. I just kind of ran back to my table with my tail between my legs. And I have like a little bit of a slow reaction with my emotions. So the next morning I woke up and I thought, she bloody well should know me. It's because of me and people like me that allow her to now flaunt herself all over the TV screen, presenting herself in her dress. And I'm not putting her down, but I'm just like, all of us were there, doing all the work that needed to be doing between AIDS activism, between queer rights. We were part of it. So I decided to make this series. And it's been great because most of my series are about themes, but this is really about those people. So it's been really great, and a lot of them, again, like there's this kind of like modesty. They're like, okay, if you say I should be a legend, Lola, so I don't know, it's just kind of beautiful. And I'd like to finish with this. My family is the reason why I'm standing here before you guys. I realize now that I'm very lucky. From the day that I was old enough to say to my mom, I don't want to wear a dress anymore, my dad was taking me to the shop and going straight to the boys department. So I've always been like this. This is Lola Flash, right? And my family has always loved me, and they still love me for being who I am. The guy there on the corner, on the end, on your right, is Charles H. Bullock, and he's my great-great-grandfather. There's some other people that are in that photo that you probably recognize. Madam C.J. Walker and the handsome Booker T. Washington. And so my great-grandfather was responsible for founding a bunch of YMCAs back in the day. They were called the Colored Ys, and they were kind of like the Mecca for black people because we didn't have any place to go. This was during the Jim Crow law days, and we couldn't go anywhere. So they learned how to read, they learned how to swim, they got scholarships. There was even housing for people who were like had poor luck. So my great-grandfather knew back then that we needed equity, right? That was like over 100 years ago. And I'm sure that Madam C.J. Walker and Booker T were there because they were probably funders, they probably were benefactors because they had the bucks, so they were probably putting money there. And so legacy is really important to me, and I wish Deb was here because I was thinking like maybe 100 years from now, there might be one of my family members standing up here in front of you all, or your family members, and there'll be a picture of me and Deb and maybe Michelle Obama, and one's got to dream, right? But them talking about their need to make a difference, because that's definitely the reason why I continue to work. And on a serious note, I believe that it doesn't really matter how long it takes you to get there, but as long as you get there. And I'd like to say to you guys, please vote, please be nice to each other, and please remember to not only look, but to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lola. Personally, I love portraiture, and those are really stunning portraits. And I also really love film, and I hope you haven't given up film permanently. Okay, our next speaker will be ready, Roy. Ready?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try, and I was actually sitting on there, going through a lot of thoughts. Surpass. I'm a huge fan of words. Actually, before I got into photography, I thought I was gonna be the next Langston Hughes / Conti. What's his name? Yes, and I was just like sidetracked, fell in love with these things. But I do want everybody to know that the first thing I see are words. An image for me is a poem, it's a story. It's never, I don't think I look out and I see an image and I have to capture the image. So when I saw the word surpassing, the first thing I think about is SIR, as in transitioning. And so I was just like, what a beautiful way to title that series. The idea of transitioning in the word SIR, passing, although you have SUR. So it was just beautiful. That's how I see the words. And so let's talk about how I got into this thing. These images are images from Katrina, and they're here because, for me, this is the beginning of my vision, of who I am now. I went down to the South because Harry Belafonte said that America took so long to go to the South because of the forgotten people. Thanks to Amy, I was able to get down there with a grant from OSI at the time. And so I went down there with the idea of photographing forgotten people. I shot 400 and something 4x5 Polaroids. The world has only seen 20. But these are some of the images I photographed. There's some amazing experiences, like when I put this image up, it started to break because I had washed it in rusted water, and I was yelling at the emulsion to like stop moving, stop running. And so I quickly went into another room, washed it off, put it up. This is what the negative looked like. But when I scanned it, I was like magic, and I was happy. And I have other ones that I have never even looked at. Usually I just say, in this picture she's 15 and the kid is 2 and she's pregnant. There's so many stories. This to me was the best story of the South for me. She fed me every day. Miss Tucker fed me every day at the Waffle House. She asked me to go photograph her husband, who was very ill. On the last day, the morning I went up there, I was in this beautiful, beautiful garden. And I photographed four sheets, $20 each. So at the point of $80, because it's registered in my mind, he goes, "What's wrong with your face?" He could read that I wasn't happy. There was a clothesline in the picture, and it just looked uncomfortable, cutting across their heads. And so he turned around, took a machete, chopped it. And I'm like, wow, like you could tell that line served the purpose. So the fact that he cut it was like huge to me. So I shot it. Much better. He said, "Could you shoot one more?" I'm like, oh my God, we're now in $120. And he goes, "I want to give my wife this rose because I don't know if I'll be able to give her another rose on another Sunday." And looking back, I never heard it. I just heard $120. And I photographed it because I didn't have the image. And when I was packing up, he came over to me and he said, "We both would like to give you this rose because we don't know if we'll ever see you on another Sunday." And he died 2 months later. And it was only when I was looking at this image did I see how swollen his hands were. And that actually he was on dialysis. He was actually in his bed on dialysis when she woke him up on this morning. And I'm just going to run through these images to get to the other part of the conversation. Believe it or not, I have two presentations going on in my head. This is also a very interesting one. I was in the middle of Mobile, Alabama. This white guy walks up to me and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I go, "I'm photographing the story." And he goes, "Come with me and I'll tell you the real story." And in my head, I'm saying, this white dude think I'm a fool. I'm gonna come to the South and follow some white dude to which corner of the South to go find the right story. But I'm Jamaican, very fearless. I also had a machete in my car, so I followed him. So he brought me to this woman, and he goes, "This is my mom." And I go, "He must think I just came off the boat." And it turned out that this woman was brought to his mother's house, his grandmother's house, when she was 12, to be the playmate for his mom. They were both 12. And she grew up in the home, became an adult, not only grew up as the doll, but also took care of him, and then took care of his kids. And so when I dropped her home that night, her kids said she was never our mom. She was always theirs. And so I was happy that I was brave, you know, to go get this story. So it was actually the real story, one of the real stories. I never saw what women did. Let me say that over again. Whenever I went to the projects, or here, Benicia, housing projects, I never saw the women between 9 o'clock when I was there and 4 o'clock when I left. Barely. So one day I stayed. I was like, I'm going to see these women. And of course, 5:36, they started to come on their verandas. And so I went to talk, like, you know, what do you guys do? And anybody can guess.
Where is this?
Mobile, Alabama.
Oh.
Guess whose birthday it is? And again, I want to put little dots, because these little stories, where is it? Here. Back to here, became something that I started to deal with. Also, this was also important. I had finished photographing. I had finished taking pictures. And this guy walks up to the car, my 4x5 was in the back of the car, and he goes, "Can you take my picture, please?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm done. Like, I'm literally done." And he goes, "Please, I have a newborn." And so I'm like, I don't have a newborn picture from the South. So I followed him in his house, and his woman was sitting on the bed just like that. Like, she didn't move. No matter where I put him and the baby, she never moved. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is where I'm gonna have to take this picture. And what felt familiar, because how I photograph is I look for some sense of commonality between me and the person I'm photographing. What felt familiar was when I asked him the baby's name, she said the baby's name using her last name. And I was like, ooh, it's kind of different. Coming from Jamaica, all kids get the father's name. And so, without sounding like a patriarch, I was like, what's going on? And he was just like, you know, I just came back from Angola, she's on me to get work, and he felt familiar. Because back here in New York, that's how I felt. You know, I wasn't working, and I kept hearing, you know, a man brings home the bacon, a man da da da. And so, this is what I photographed. This is what I felt when I photographed it. 2 years later, I went back to go look for her. And now I know why she didn't move.
Oh, wow.
But 2 years later, we had built up a rapport where she could do this. So, before I go on, so how did I get here? I get here because somewhere I read this quote by Albert Camus. And it said, when a soul has suffered, it develops a taste for the misfortunes. And I remember when I was milling over this idea of how do I photograph men who felt like me. Remember those bullets that I showed you? The guy, the Windex guy, and these three men who were just sitting in the park. I'm not saying that black men can't sit in the park, but I grew up in a culture where the older generation was always, I mean, I cannot walk down my block thinking of myself as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11. I couldn't walk down my street without an older man saying something to me. Whether it's your shoes, if you shine those shoes overnight, the polish thickens the leather. Like, there was always a lesson. And here I was watching these men. I would always ask myself, how can a man, again, going back to dude from Angola, how can a man take care of a family on $1 incense, or scrubbing off Windex, that at the intersection, Windex in a car for 50 cents. And it would always go right inside of me. And I would think about these stories, like what does it do to his manhood? What does it do to his psyche? So I got an assignment, especially, again, I'm going fast. I have no idea what, ooh, see, 5 minutes. I got an assignment to photograph black men and their boys. What are these black men telling their boys, especially when it comes to walking on the street and being engaged by anybody, police, anybody in authority. And so I went to Baltimore first, and believe it or not, the first person I spoke to was a woman. I said to her, you know, where I could find, you know, men who have sons, and she goes, it's gonna be a hard one to find because they're not here. And I said, where are they? They're in prison. And I had to call my cousin. I was like, cuz, gotta help me find some fathers. So, this is another funny story. He's from the hood. Like, I'm talking about street, very, very street. Like, talking to me with a camera is an issue. So he immediately was very dismissive, like, I don't think my son would want me to take a picture. You know, of course, I ran over to the son, I was like, I'm doing this story about fathers and this. He's like, of course! So no, daddy had to be like, oh my God, come. But of course, he asked me like a million questions, like, where are you taking it from? I'm just gonna roll through these. And that's actually son shaving his father's head in Jackson, Mississippi. After I did this picture, I put this picture up on my Instagram, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. The picture went viral. We were in Jackson, Mississippi. They picked up the story and went to interview him. And the first thing he said was, this guy with an accent walked in here saying he was from Time magazine, wanted to photograph me. I thought he was lying. And every time I listened to it, I cracked up. But this is what he does. He said, when I was raising my sons, I brought them to the jail. He said, one of the first things I did, was the first accident, major accident, I brought my son to the accident. And before I went there, I told him, I pretended to tie my shoes, and I told him to go over to where the dead man was in the car. And I told him to stand there and look at that body, because I wanted to know what happens when a drunken man drives a car. And of course, time is not going to put 2 black men in prison. But this was, to me, one of the most powerful way of teaching a black child, which would have led me into, this is also another beautiful story. Remember this little picture? So I met them on another story. I met them on an AIDS story, right? About a minute. I met them on an AIDS story. And while we're vibing about black men living in Jackson, about AIDS, we became friends. And I told him I was going to come back, I wanted to photograph, wanted to do some environmental picture. And while we're talking, he goes, remember Boozy? I'm like, yeah, Boozy was killed. And we're talking about black lives in Jackson, how easily can be snuffed out. And it was all about guns and and I was like, I can't take this. I'm not going to take this because it could be incriminating. And then he goes on and he talks about being abused by his mom. Because initially he had heard that I was there for fathers and sons. And I have never heard a son talk, other than my son, I've never heard another son use the words, I love him. Like, passionately love him. And I go, dude, I have to come photograph you and your father. Like, and it's funny that the whole part of the story was the father had to talk about his son. And he stammered a lot. And so he didn't want to talk, and so his son was talking for him. And then his son said, yeah, he always says shit. And as soon as he said shit, the father said, shh. shit and just went on for like 2 hours of talking. But it was just a beautiful, it was one of the most beautiful stories. Because I mean, I just enjoyed, I know the relationship I had with my son, and I don't see it all the time. This was beautiful. And I'll just show these and be done. This is Cairo, Illinois. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for those 3 extraordinary presentations. Why don't the speakers come up to the table here so we could have a discussion amongst all of us with the speakers now.
Are those 4x5s? All of them 4x5s?
No. It became digital soon, very quickly.
Anywhere. Excuse me, I don't want to hit you on the head here. I believe this microphone is live. If it's okay to take the moderator's privilege to ask the first question. Before we got started earlier, we were talking amongst ourselves over there, and Reddy, I just want to pick up on something you were talking about. Reddy was talking about being at a photo convention in Germany, Photokina, and you're talking about a white photographer there who had photographed in Somalia, and Sudan, sorry. And you were very critical of the pictures, and you said that he could have done things a little bit different. But can you just talk about that a bit more? I mean, that's a very charged situation today of white photographers going to Africa, photographing people in challenging situations. What could a photographer in that situation do to be more woke about taking those pictures?
I go back and forth with the idea that somebody else can tell my story. Do I need to?
Yeah.
And it's one of those where I have to speak slowly because I do not want to I do not want to be seen as the black police or but it's really difficult for me. I mean, I have photographed black men with AIDS in Jackson, Mississippi. I photographed women who have been sexually assaulted. I would never in a second believe that I know enough about both situations to not consult either Lola or a friend who is a woman, sit down and go, how can I best tell this story? Coming from a place where I am neither a member of the LGBTQ community or a member of a woman. It's very difficult for anybody who has never ever bought a tube of, I'm trying to, a way of saying this. Anybody in here has ever paid for a squirt of toothpaste? A squirt, like you go to school in the morning and you go to the shop with your toothbrush and you buy a squirt of toothpaste. Anybody ever bought a stick, half a stick of butter, a piece of bread? Anybody has ever, I mean, my mom was here recently and she was like, Reddy, you can throw some of those shoes in them. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not from that. I'm not from that this new life where the shoe has a little crack. And I've sewn so many shoes. She goes, but then you had one, now you have more. You can, I mean, if you haven't, then you can't speak to it. Last thing I'm gonna say is, last night I was watching, and this kind of ties it up. I was watching Project Runway. And believe it or not, and Heidi Klum wants to kick somebody off. She wants to kick off a woman from Puerto Rico who's making this, I'm sure, I'm saying it like this so anybody who's watched it remember it, this beautiful red dress with a gold corset. And it looked like Wonder Woman. suit. And her thing was, if this dress walks down the runway without the author's or the designer's words, then we have to just deal with the story. And I'm going, that's the problem. The problem is, that is not the story. The story is the designers. And I think so many of us are looking at what is presented as the story, as opposed to researching and figuring out who picked the cotton, who twilled the cotton, who created the dress. There's a bigger story. There's sometimes a bigger story. And so many of us just deal with what is presented and it becomes this story. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
Not at all. That was great. Okay, what about you? Questions, comments on what you've seen and heard, or outside of what you've seen and heard tonight that want to bring into this discussion? Yes, Bruce.
There were so many images that were incredibly beautiful. And I'm wondering, is that always something that you have the good fortune of capturing at the moment, or you're looking for per your subject? I noted that you had this beautiful adolescent. You see her aging very rapidly, and then you had a photograph of her as an adult in a hoodie, and she was strikingly beautiful. So are you searching for those moments? And there was also something about, before you went into the explanation, saying she's a fine pianist, and we heard it all, that there's something about this person who's very intelligent in the story that you're telling. And then you're actually revealed more of it. So all of you, is there something that you go out of pictures, certainly when you're taking portraits of people, that you're trying to get the fullest out of them, or is it just happens that over time you're there at the right moment? Get it?
I mean, I'm not thinking beforehand, oh, I'm gonna make a gorgeous picture of Kim at a certain moment in time. We're hanging out and I'm taking some pictures and I'm responding to my feelings at the moment. There's just one or two pictures where we're thinking together, oh, let's go out and make a picture together. But yeah, so I hope that my pictures show my feelings towards her, which is, feelings of love.
Yes, I'm definitely looking to create images that show the beauty of the person. So, for different things, like for surpassing, sometimes I can just see the way a person holds himself. Like, I know that they can strike a pose, as corny as maybe that might sound. And I think with the older women, I can't really explain what happens, but like as Reddy was saying, like with the 4x5 film, I probably would take 4 to 6 shots, 4x5 shots of them. So I don't have, I don't take a lot of time. I mean, probably setting up is more than the actual shoot. And this year I've had a lot of interviews, and I've been working towards explaining what happens, like once I get the camera set up and I'm focused and I put my film in, and it's like, okay, I sometimes wonder if, like, because I'm a teacher, a high school teacher, and I wonder if the skill of being able to kind of read someone really quickly and know, like, should I talk loudly to this person or quietly, or should I make jokes, or should I be serious? You sort of have to figure out how it is that you're going to communicate to that person to get the most out of them. But for me, I feel like I get the trust of the person, and again, I hate to speak in cliches, but everyone is beautiful, And for me, my job is to find that beauty, turn the, maybe it's just a turn of the head to the left or to the right, you know what I mean? It's like, or the lighting, I guess it's a skill that I know it's a skill that I have, and it's wonderful because especially a lot of people that I photograph, they don't see themselves as beautiful, right? So when they look at my picture, like people, my thing is that people say, "Oh, I don't take good pictures," and I'm like, "But I do."
Yeah.
So it's true, and these all the people that I shoot are really deemed invisible. Like those aren't catchphrases. They're people that aren't always looked at in the highest esteem. So, I think the 4x5 camera also, especially nowadays with cell phones, and I'm just as bad as my kids are. I'm always like shooting, taking selfies and stuff. But I believe that the 4x5 camera does really make people kind of like sit up, and it's like Lola Flash is here, and I think it transcends into the photographs.
Let me just add something. There's something that I noticed in Nina's images, and that was in so many different situations, Kim's face reflected something. I don't want to use the word beautiful. It was different, and she was plain. She had a different expression. When I'm presented with something like that, in our conversations, I'll see the expressions, and then I'll know I want to capture that expression. And so I'll wait there. I'll keep talking to you until you present that person to me again. It's not. Oh, I want to find. No. You present yourself, and I choose the ones that I want to photograph, as opposed to just clicking. Like it's a very intentional act for me.
Oh, can I add something that
Yeah.
reminded me of something? So another thing I do for surpassing is and Carrie was the funniest. So basically what I do is once I get everything focused again, I say, and I did that with Carrie, and she was like, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And I was like, "Okay, I want you to look straight into the lens because the gaze is very important, right?" There was a time when we weren't able to look at Master in the eye, right? So that gaze is very important for me. And so I say, look straight into the camera, think about pride and power, and think about someone that you admire. So Carrie goes, "I'll think of you." And with that, I was like under my like cloth. I was just like, it's just like, Carrie's there. It's like, "Oh, get it together. You can do it." You know what I mean? So sometimes I provoke it in a way.
Lamar?
Nina and I corresponded before we never met. My name is Burroughs Lamar, and I wrote you about you were doing a piece on mentally ill. And what I do for a living, I'm a documentary photographer as well, is I work for New York City Department of Health in behavioral health, and my agency oversees outpatient treatment providers that provide psychiatric treatment. So Ruger's question was, can another race photograph another race? Is there some kind of tension between the two? So in your photographs, first I want to commend you for what you did, because I work with that population. She would be classified what they call a CAMI. CAMI stands for chemical abusers mentally ill. And those are the worst patients to treat because they have what they call a dual diagnosis, right? And SUD, substance use disorder, and they have mental illness. Those are the ones, I have clients, I go to inpatient units. And Bellevue, I've been to all the psychiatric units in Manhattan and the Bronx, seeing my clients. They look exactly like her, a lot of them do. So I know exactly that population she falls into. And for you to take it upon yourself, the humanitarian with me, to take her in, and then have the challenge of photographing your friend, this person, must have been extreme. So my question to you is, I know you must have struggled being conflicted internally with, here's someone I care about, at the same time I'm a photographer. So can you speak to that?
Well, as I said, I stopped photographing her for a really long time, yeah, I just had a couple little pictures, right? she'd come over, I'd take some shots, or I'd take some pictures of her and my daughter. And it was only then when I really thought, well, I have nothing of this person to help me remember her if she's going to die. I mean, her T-cell counts went so low, and she was so skinny. And so then I just started photographing her almost like automatically, right? And I think not having any purpose other than that didn't make me feel conflicted in any way. It became then a challenge once we decided that we were going to somehow create something for the world to see. And then it was, you know, what do we want to show? What do I want to show? What is she like? What pictures does she like? What pictures ring true to her? And I would never have ever thought of putting these pictures out in the world without this being a mutual thing, because I actually don't think that I have the right to do that. Even though, you know, they're, okay, my pictures, right? But I don't ever felt like I would have had the right to do that. And so, I don't think I had some of the same conflicts that I would have had if it was someone said, oh, Nina, follow an addict around for a few months and see what you get, you know? But there were things that I just simply didn't want to see that I knew were happening. And I just didn't want to see them. I didn't want to go into a crack house and watch everything. I didn't want to see that. So, I don't know, I hope that answers your question. But I'm glad to see you in person.
This is just a question. I mean, all your photography was amazing, and it's just a question about your subject. How did she learn to play the piano like that? That was just like so, like amazing.
Yeah, she wrote that song too.
So, and was that piano that you photographed just in the street?
There's two pianos.
Okay.
The two clips are actually a couple of years apart. So the first piano is in where she lives, supportive housing. The other piano is in, the city does this program this summer, which is quite lovely. They put pianos out in different parks.
Really?
And, so that's Tompkins Square Park, that other piano. So you know, she grew up in a middle-class family, and she learned a little bit of piano again, and then she just kept playing and teaching herself, and she could compose in her head.
And she
yeah,
was a good artist as well. I mean, her drawings were
precisely.
amazing.
She's a good artist. She's creative. She's, which is also another reason why we wanted to do this book together, because I mean, she's a creative participant, right? And anyway, but thanks for appreciating the piano.
Hello, I'm Yasmin, and I'm a grad student here at Tisch, and I'm actually studying dance, but I also do photography as well, and I do film and digital. And so for my thesis, I'm basically wanting to do research on women of color choreographers, and so with that, I guess I'm more so capturing emotion, and I'm wondering if you have, I guess, like, any advice in the best way maybe to capture these women of color that I feel like I'm not necessarily getting in my curriculum, and I just want to showcase something that shows their art, that shows their love of the art, that shows, I guess, kind of like their experiences as women of color within dance, and just like provoking that through a still image. If that makes sense. I know you guys. I just wanted to.
Woman of color.
So you're saying that you want to create one image
No, a series. So like several images.
That
So
evoke-
maybe like one image of each dancer or choreographer.
that evokes them, or you want to do some portraits of them?
I think I want to do both. Both portrait, because I want to really sit down and talk with these women, but then I also want to document them in the studio, or maybe document them within a rehearsal space, or maybe them actually creating choreography. I just feel like that's something that I haven't necessarily seen, and something that
For my Salt series, I photographed the women, and then after I do that, I do like about a 15 to 20 minute video of them. And I've only actually shown I've only used the vocals. Like I had a show, I had pen and brush as I mentioned. So when you walked into the space, you heard their voices. So you didn't really know who was talking, but you heard their voices. So I'm thinking maybe something like where you do portraits and then somewhere have like a music thread, so when you come in, maybe there's a monitor or something that has some of their work. I mean, do you know who they are? Because that would be more the challenge would be to find them.
So my initial, the first person I met is Claudia Schreier. She's actually doing choreography for American Ballet Theater and Dance Theater Harlem. She's an up and coming choreographer who's doing work for classical ballet, which that's very rare. And then there's also Mina Butler. She's up and coming. She's working with Cover Street in Chicago. There's Camille Brown, of course. There's actually a lot that I didn't realize. The first day I thought about it because I was just going to write papers on them. And then I realized I want to actually meet these people. And why not document them? And why not create a space where I'm showcasing this? Because if I'm not getting that here, then maybe I should be the person to do it, to showcase it. And I just have this image of like actually having a book, a tangible book, because just being a millennial and having everything on Instagram and on my phone, you forget how it feels to have a tangible copy of your work.
It'd also be a great thing to leave behind for those that are coming along, so that they can learn what's going on. Because that's you got to tell the story. Yeah.
We are out here.
That's the only thing off the top of my head. You could email me if I could think about something else. But again, I'm not always the best with impromptu thoughts.
Okay.
But feel free to email me.
Good question there.
When and how did you?
Sorry.
Well, I just kind of have the same advice for questions like this where you're not sure how to begin is meet someone first and spend the day with them and see what you see. And maybe that will evoke something in you and give you an idea of how to proceed, at least with the first person. And then just, experiment. Don't worry about if you get what you want that day or if it's got to be perfect. Just explore it, and I'm sure you'll find something. And that can also be then a path forward.
Or you do it the hard way, which is, so I'm going to ask you bluntly, why would I be interested? There you go. What makes this a story?
It makes it a story because
You don't have to tell me. I'm just instigating thought. Why is this story necessary? What is it that's going to make this different from just taking pictures, taking portraits? Just keep digging, and then find somebody, go sit, and somebody will just reach out. Instead of going just dry, bring something with you. I mean, a very good Jamaican proverb or saying is, go to somebody's house, bring wine. But guess what? They might not have any. You might be the one drinking that one. So just that's all I'm saying. Why would I be interested in this story? So find a story. Find the story. Find something that's intentional. Find purpose in it. Instead of just, I'm just photograph movement with. Because believe me, somebody has done that. Be different. That's great. That's what you're gonna rise.
Yes, over here.
When and how did you guys discover your purpose as photographers?
It's a biggie. That's biggie.
I'll do it. I'll go for it.
Boogie.
What do you guys think? I'm an only child, and I always had a camera, so that was like my toy. And so I can't say that I was making earth-shattering images when I was little, but when I got to high school, I got a camera, a real camera, a darkroom. So fast forward, I went to college for photography, and I didn't show the images I'm going to talk about because I only had 15 minutes. I just tried to be concise. But if you look at my website, you'll see my AIDS work. And that's a process where I reversed all the color. And just really quickly, my dad used to buy me paper, and I ran out of the right paper, so I was using the wrong paper to print slides onto. And so I had this like reverse color, so like, you know, like you would be all in white if I photographed Glenn, right? Lori would have a green shirt on and a black face. So I loved the colors, and my teachers were like, why are you doing that, you know? And I was like, I realized, talk about being still woke, I was woke when I was like 5, because I used to like to go to the libraries. I was a big nerd, and I still am, and I used to love reading the dictionaries. And so when I was like young, I realized that black was bad, right? And black was dirty, white was pure. And that always stuck with me. I don't think I ever talked to my mom or dad about it, but I remember thinking that. So then in my photographs, I realized that, in fact, white was good and black was bad, right? Because I was changing everything around, reversing everything. And so then I realized like the power of photography, and that being an artist to me is about showing people how you see, right? Looking through your lens. And so I had this wacky colors that I used for like over 20 years, this palette that I used. And that's when I think I really realized like, wow, you know, I can actually go in the darkroom and like make this image, and like, and then for over 20 years, people were like, you're still doing those weird colors, Lola? And I'm like, yep, I sure am. So I have a show in Rochester right now that has all of that work. And it's interesting because I think that it wasn't, photography is still such a young field compared to painting and sculpture and such. But I think that people weren't really ready for it then. And there were no computers back then when I started this process. And I think people are now more used to, you know, Photoshop and all these kind of weird things that people do. So I think that that was what empowered me to then continue to keep doing my work.
Mine is kind of easier. I just wanted to photograph people that look like me. It's as simple as that. Men that feel like me, women that, I'll give you an example. When Me Too broke, I have never asked my sister if she was sexually harassed or sexually molested in her life. I've never asked my mom if she was raped, sexually molested, or sexually harassed. And photography allows me this space to use that bridge, because we have built these bridges. We haven't been using them. And I would like to think that over the past 2-3 years, I have become more intentional and more purposeful about using the medium to talk about what I see every day. I read somewhere that if you can come outside your house and find an image in a 2-block radius, then you're not a photographer. And so most of my images over the past 5 years have been in my neighborhood of Bed-Stuy. I just come out and I look at eyes that look like mine, and I sit and I try to find some commonality, and I photograph it.
Well, I don't have a very clear answer other than I wanted to be a writer, and I became a writer, and then didn't like sitting down. I'm a little agitated. I like to move around, and then I also didn't like having all these editors picking through my text, and I discovered that in photography I could say things that wouldn't be allowed in writing, and then I could be more subversive actually, and I'd be outside and moving around and exploring, and so a lot of my work on political America kind of came from that, And also it was hard for me, photography. Writing came really easily, and so I wanted the challenge to try and learn the medium. And yeah, I guess that's part of the answer.
What's that?
Yeah. So I think earlier people were asking about how could you photograph another community sensitively. But personally, I'm still like afraid of photographing my own community sensitively. Specifically, I'm working on a documentary project about a house that a lot of trans women live in together. And I'm just worried that like I will bring in some kind of framework that is like unintentionally like hostile to queerness, and that this will color the product that I produce out of this documentary. And do you have anything, especially Lola, to say?
There was a word that you said I couldn't hear. You said you were worried about bringing
in some kind of framework that is in some way hostile to queerness, even though I personally am also a trans woman.
Right.
So I'm just worried about like that kind of like baggage and the internalized like homophobia and transphobia.
I mean, I think that every series starts off with you thinking, you know, being intentional about it, and almost always it changes. Again, Salt, I started off, you know, saying that they're, you know, 70 years plus and, you know, passionately engaged in their work. And I realized if you reach 70 and you're female and you're not crazy, then you need to be in this series. You know what I mean? Like, this world is really tough on us, and, you know, there are a lot of reasons. I mean, that's another panel, right? So I would just think that maybe you want to start off with people that are your friends that are trans. And, you know, I think that if you're open about the fact that you want to come in with this kind of like clear lens and not bring any, because like I was saying, like we all have these biases, that you don't want to bring those biases in, so that if you're starting off with just like a few people maybe, and then all of you guys being aware of the fact that you want to make this, you know, sort of new approach or pure approach to it, then you can all like be like, oops, that's not quite right, or we're not, you know, this isn't what we want to present. You know, maybe some other people that are artistic, that, you know, but also maybe some that aren't. When I edit some of my, especially like my digital stuff, a lot of times I'll send out just texts like, you know, I have like a straight white friend and a gay black friend, and, you know, I sort of try and do like a range of different kinds of people that I know, so that I can, usually I know what image I like, but I like to kind of see from different kinds of like frameworks how they like it. That's what I would do. And I wouldn't be, I think it's admirable that you're worried, but I think that I would worry about that when you get to those barriers. You know what I mean? And if you're in an environment with, you make this sort of beginning with people that you care about, then I think you'll be, I'm always afraid of like a negative thoughts, you know what I mean? So just keep the positive going and make it clear to everyone, like, okay, this is like a stereotypical thing, we don't want to do this, right? And it's like, oh, because again, we all have biases, so that would be my advice. Good luck to you.
Be fearless. That's one. Two, I'll give you two examples. Eugene Richards, Cocaine Blue, Cocaine True, or Cocaine Blue, which one is it?
Both of them, actually.
Cocaine True, Cocaine Blue is a book that he had to defend. It's a white dude going into black neighborhoods photographing the cocaine epidemic, and he had to defend it. I do not know of a black photographer who has shot something that gritty, that truthful, that honest. And I've looked, and I respect the fact that he stood up and defended it, took the criticisms. The last thing I'm going to say is, there's going to be that one person. No matter how good you are, there's going to be that one trans person who you didn't cover. No matter how broad your brush is, there's going to be that one person who didn't believe that all the bristles touched them. Be fearless. Go about it with purpose. Think about your story. Be honest and defend it. Don't be afraid to stand up and defend it.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. You two got it from my point of view.
Well, I think we need to bring this discussion now to a close, but we'll have a reception, and please carry on in a more private manner. So really, thank you for. And I would just like to comment that I think those last words by Ruddy were a terrific call to the students here about how to approach photography and how to go on and do your work. Be fearless and do it with purpose. Oh, and Nina, will you bring out your book so we can see it?
Oh, sure.